What about some of your other service, let's say within this country, for example, Department of Energy?
Once you get on the committee list of people who are willing to do it, reasonable, somewhat broad-minded, etc., and there's always a fine line, because I'm not, I don't think, the doormat type. I mean, sometimes people want on a committee someone who will just agree with whoever's running the program. I'm not like that. Okay, but I don't think, I could be wrong, that I'm seen as disruptive and difficult and causing a lot of trouble. So it's kind of, they'll say, well, we'll get her because, you know, people know she has a mind of her own, but not too much a mind of her own or something. So I was asked to be on the advisory committee for the Office of Advanced Scientific Computing Research. So I chaired that committee for a while. I was chair of the advisory committee for the Math and Physical Sciences Directorate at NSF. And those were always interesting, and I find it fascinating to learn about how different groups function. You know, when you're in math or computer science, you tend to think everybody else is like you, but it's not. They're not like you. So you have to learn about these different cultures and so on and so forth. And then once you start doing that, you get invited by other countries. So I was on a review of Canadian math, which was extremely interesting. Canada has a very different system of funding. And some of the issues that came up would simply not arise in the U.S. But it was, again, a good group, and Jean-Pierre Bourguignon was the chair of it, and I learned a lot. So every time you learn something. And in 2010, there was a review of UK math research, which I chaired. That was a great experience, and it was really nice to be able to invite people to serve on that, whom I had met on other committees who are in areas completely different from mine. But I know they're very good, they're respected, they're sensible, they're not doormats. You know, you have a long list of qualities that you want. So I actually enjoyed that. I mean, sometimes people say, how can you stand that? And I think it's sort of interesting to hear this. Not if it took 2 weeks, but 3 days.
But some of these things were a lot of work, though.
They were a lot of work. That's right. That's right. But, you know, is it worthwhile?
Yeah. Well, that's the other reason you're invited, because people know they can count on you to do the work that has to be done and prepare reports and so forth.
Right. I knew a woman who used to say, I'm not going to be on a committee unless it personally benefits me. And I said, you know, you may be ruling yourself out of something good because it may not be obvious how it will benefit you. I was trying to persuade her to do something, and she said, no, if I don't benefit, I'm not doing it. I think that's hurt her. I think that's hurt her. I think people say, well, we can't ask her because she won't do it because of whatever. So I've never been on a committee that I thought was a total waste. Some are much more interesting than others. So that's my story about committees.
Well, MSRI is another one.
Well, that was a funny thing. So Bill Thurston called me, Math Sciences Research Institute at Berkeley, which had before that been known as basically a pure math institute. Now, I hate the terms pure math and applied math. I try never to use them, but I'm making an exception here. So it was known primarily as a pure math institute, okay? So Bill Thurston, who was the director, phoned me and said, would you like to be on the scientific advisory committee at MSRI? I said, I think you have the wrong person. Well, because I thought I'm not a pure math person. He said, no, we're trying to get a broader committee. I said, oh, okay, you know, I'll do it. And then I was on the MSRI Scientific Advisory Committee, and then Thurston stepped down as director and David Eisenbud became director. And the MSRI Scientific Advisory Committee was really a great experience. I learned so much about other areas of math. And the other thing you get, again, I don't want to sound too obnoxious here, but you get so, let's say you're trying to decide which postdocs to invite and they have letters of recommendation. You can almost get some skill about reading a letter of recommendation even if you don't know the area, based on the words people use to describe it. You know, how they describe it, the excitement they have, the enthusiasm they have, and so on. So that was very interesting. In fact, fascinating. And I enjoyed it very much.
And I think you were also involved on something in the Research Triangle? North Carolina?
The SAMC, right, for Applied Math and Statistics. Yeah, so I was on that advisory committee. And again, it was, I don't want to be a Pollyanna here. I mean, it wasn't always wonderful to be on these committees, but I think on balance, I learned a lot. Plus, you see how different organizations function, okay? The MSRI, Scientific Advisory Committee, was heavily involved in picking the programs and the postdocs. At SAMC, less so. So I could kind of compare the way I thought the programs turned out and how useful the Scientific Advisory Committee was and so on and so forth, which you would never know from the outside if you weren't part of that.
And you're also on the board of Matheon in Berlin?
Oh yes, that's been great. So Matheon is an institute, sort of an institute of 5 universities and institutes from Berlin. Berlin, which is a state in Germany. And they invited me to be on their scientific advisory committee when they started. So they got a big grant from the equivalent of the NSF. And the idea was to use math in technologies. So it was a lot of very good math, but they had to have sort of applications in mind. And they did a very good job of dividing up the people. Martin Gritschel is heavily involved in that, Rolf Mehring. And they wanted some advice on how to do it. So the Scientific Advisory Committee has people mostly from Europe, but a couple of Americans. And we get to hear what they're doing, and there was a re-competition, and they got more money. And it's been very exciting to see how they're doing this, keeping the quality of the research high, but also producing things that are useful. And I think they have an amazing record in doing that. So that's been great.
We shouldn't forget to talk about the National Academy. You're one of the few people who has been elected to both the National Academy of Science and Engineering. What's that experience been like?
Courant has 3 such people. I don't know, Leslie, Marcia, and me. I don't know what the number is, the total number, but it's not.
And Jim Demmel, I guess, is another one at Berkeley.
That's
that
right.
right?
Yes. So I was in the National Academy of Engineering first. And scientific computing is an area that many people feel doesn't have a home, and we bemoan the fact that are we in math, are we in computer science, what are we, etc. But in the academies, it's a good position to be in because scientific computing, depending on how you do it, fits into computer science and engineering in the National Academy of Engineering. So there are people there who write numerical software. Cleve Moeller is a member, Bob Bixby is a member, et cetera, et cetera. And somehow I was elected to that. And then I was on the peer committee, which picks the people for the ballot, and I chaired the committee on membership. And then, I don't know how, I was elected to the National Academy of Sciences, but it's the same thing. I think what we do is something that fits well into the applied math section in the National Academy of Sciences. So, you know, some other people, it's not clear if they fit in, quote, math or applied math. What we do fits clearly into applied math. So that's another thing. And I was chair of the applied math section for 3 years, and that was very interesting as well.
What did that involve?
Oh, organizing the elections and trying to make sure that people got nominated. I mean, it's an example where I think it's better for the section to have many good candidates. And some people just say, oh, it's too much work to nominate somebody. It's not that much work to nominate somebody. So I would kind of say, I'll help you with the nomination and I'll try to get more people in. Because in the National Academy of Engineering, for example, for when I was really the most active there, the number of slots allocated to each section, it's 12 sections, depended on how many nominations you got. And our section, the computer science section, had tended to have people who would only nominate the people they thought would definitely get in. So they had a very small number of nominations, and some of us, Dave Patterson was one, Bob Sproul and I, said, let's nominate people we think are really good, you know, and maybe they won't get in, but maybe they will, and this will help us, you know, get more momentum and so on and so forth. And I think that was very helpful because we became more present and we got more nominations and we got more people, and I think it's been quite successful.
So another role of the National Academy is that maybe the main role is advising the government and the
Right.
president.
Right.
Were you involved in that?
Well, it's interesting because the National Academy is asked to write reports about things, and so they're trying all the time to write these reports, and they try to get people who are members of the academies to serve on the reports. And a difficulty with the reports is so much time is needed to gather information. There's a very heavy responsibility on the National Academy because their reports are considered the gold standard. So maybe they could ask you a question and you'd just give some answer. If you were the National Academy, you'd have to conduct an intense year of research and get evidence and get witnesses and do this and that. So I think a problem that the National Academies face is they're kind of expensive. So a funding agency has to pay them to do these reports.
Is there a staff that helps
There's
with
a
that?
staff.
A big staff? Or?
I think it's reasonably big. I'm not absolutely sure about that. But some people are concerned about it because I think funding agencies, for example, I think the NSF used to provide core funding for one of the groups at the National Academy in mathematics. They don't do that so much now because they have other things to spend the money on. So I think it's a very important function of the Academy, but I think it's a worry that it's not used enough. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not involved in the leadership of the Academy, so I don't know.
Another thing is that SIAM gave you this wonderful award, Distinguished Service to the Profession.
Right.
I'm sure recognizing probably all of these things.
I actually have, I'm wearing my obnoxious hat now, the AMS Award for Public Service and the SIAM one. So why am I getting these awards? Why did I get them? Well, I think it's because of the committee service. I've tried to be helpful to different groups. And I think it's because of the activities with women and minorities, which have been, I've done a lot of that, and I've tried really hard to work on that. And I think that's considered to be an important aspect. It's not always popular. I mean, there are people that say the job of the societies is to promote math research, period, end of story. Not think about the community and not think about the future. And I think not everybody thinks that, but I think there's some pressure in that direction. So people that spend their time on, let's get more women students to come, that might not be seen as so important.
Well, speaking of women, you also gave the Emmy Noether lecture.
I did.
And that was, what was that recognizing exactly?
It's from the AWM. They have one every year, and I gave it at the joint math meeting, which takes place in January.
What did you talk about?
I talked about non-derivative optimization, and I used quotes from Jane Austen in my talk, yes, such as he had something to direct his search. It's about direct search methods. So giving those overview talks is something I do it. It's an enormous amount of work because one never wants to reuse the same talk twice. But, for groups like high school kids or undergrads, I gave a talk at Washington last fall called Math Across Campus. University of Washington, yeah. Math Across Campus, which is for undergrads in mathematics. And I talked about linear programming and what I've just said earlier about the complexity and so on and so forth. And, it was a lot of work to prepare that. I actually enjoyed it, and I think students were interested. It's not something they normally learn in that way.